Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Poetry Thursday. Throughout the month of April, which is National Poetry Month, I have been featuring my favorite poets in these episodes. And today I would like to devote this episode to the poetry of Billy Collins. And I'm going to be focusing today specifically on his early poetry. I've read him on several occasions on the channel because he is one of my favorites, but I'm going to share today some poems that I have never read on the channel before. Billy Collins is still writing poetry today. He's a contemporary American poet. He's possibly the most popular poet in the United States today. He's known for what is generally considered to be his really accessible style, and often for his kind of profound observations about ordinary life. But there's also a theme that he writes about frequently, which has to do with the writing process itself. He writes a lot about literature and about the reading and writing of poetry. And he very often writes with a very wry sense of humor. To date, Billy Collins has published 12 volumes of poetry, and he has also edited 2 anthologies. He was born in 1941 in New York City. He did his undergraduate studies at the College of the Holy Cross, and he earned both a master's degree and a PhD at the University of California, Riverside. He has taught at a number of different universities throughout the country. He's taught at Columbia University, at Sarah Lawrence, and at Lehman College of the City University of New York, and also at SUNY Stony Brook. Additionally, he is a senior distinguished fellow at the Winter Park Institute in Florida, where he currently resides with his wife, Suzanne. Billy Collins was the Poet Laureate of the United States from 2001 through 2003. Additionally, he was the New York State Poet Laureate from 2004 through 2006. In his work as Poet Laureate of the United States, he edited 2 anthologies of contemporary poetry. They are Poetry 180 and 180 More. His thinking in editing these anthologies and in putting these collections together of contemporary poetry, the thinking was that he wanted to bring accessible poetry into the hands of everyone. And he was specifically looking for poems that, as he said, anyone could read and get on a first reading. This was a part of a national initiative. It was called Poetry 180, a poem a day for American high schools. And the idea behind it was to show students that poetry can be a part of our everyday life and that it isn't just a subject to be studied and maybe endured in school. He asked teachers and school administrators to find ways to incorporate at least one poem a day into the life of their schools, one for each day of the school year, lasting roughly 180 days. He wanted students to have the experience of hearing poetry every day without the pressure of having to analyze it or interpret it. And these 2 volumes came out of that project. Billy Collins was also asked in his official capacity as poet laureate to write a poem commemorating the first anniversary of the fall of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. And he wrote and read his poem on the first anniversary, 2002. He read it in front of a joint session of Congress. Among the honors and distinctions that Billy Collins has earned, in addition to being both state and national poet laureate, are fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and also from the National Endowment of the Arts. He was designated Poet of the Year by Poetry Magazine. And the American Irish Historical Society also gave him their Culture Award. He won the Mark Twain Award for Humor in Poetry, the Norman Mailer Poetry Prize, the Donald Hall Jane Kenyon Prize in American Poetry, and he received recognition by the New York Public Library as a literary lion. I had the great fortune of hearing Billy Collins read his poetry live on 3 occasions. When I was teaching, I used to take groups of students to the Dodge Poetry Festival. This is an amazing festival that occurs every other year, and in most recent years it has been held in Newark, New Jersey. And each time that it was occurring there, I would always take a group of students. And on 2 occasions we had the great fortune of being able to hear Billy Collins read. And in one of those instances, he even read one of his most famous poems, The Lanyard, which was a poem that my students had read in my class. So it was kind of an incredible thing for them to see and hear him read something that they knew well, to hear him do that live. I also had occasion to see him with a group of my friends at the South Orange Performing Arts Center. I have a number of his collections in addition to the 2 anthologies. I have Horoscopes for the Dead. I have New and Selected Poems, Aimless Love. I have his newest book, which just came out last year, Water, Water. And I think I featured this in a separate episode when I first got that book. And today, as I said, I'm going to focus on his early poetry, and I have this collection of new and selected poems, Sailing Alone Around the Room. And this contains poems from various collections that he wrote in the 1980s and the 1990s. So these are some of his earliest published poems, and I'm going to be reading from that collection today. And as I said, I'm going to read some poems that I don't believe I have ever shared on the channel before. Okay, so I'm going to start with uh, a poem that came from a collection that he published in 1988. This collection was The Apple That Astonished Paris. And the poem that I'm going to be reading is called Advice to Writers. Even if it keeps you up all night, wash down the walls and scrub the floor of your study before composing a syllable. Clean the place as if the Pope were on his way. Spotlessness is the niece of inspiration. The more you clean, the more brilliant your writing will be. So do not hesitate to take to the open fields, to scour the undersides of rocks, or swab in the dark forest upper branches, nests full of eggs. When you find your way back home and stow the sponges and brushes under the sink, you will behold in the light of dawn the immaculate altar of your desk, a clean surface in the middle of a clean world. From a small vase, sparkling blue, lift a yellow pencil, the sharpest of the bouquet, and cover pages with tiny sentences, like long rows of devoted ants that followed you in from the woods. And from that same collection, I'm going to read Schoolsville. Glancing over my shoulder at the past, I realize the number of students I have taught is enough to populate a small town. I can see it nestled in a paper landscape, chalk dust flurrying down in winter, nights dark as a blackboard. The population ages but never graduates. On hot afternoons, they sweat the final in the park. And when it's cold, they shiver around stoves, reading disorganized essays out loud. A bell rings on the hour and everybody zigzags into the streets with their books. I forgot all their last names first and their first names last in alphabetical order. But the boy who always had his hand up is an alderman and owns the haberdashery. The girl who signed her papers in lipstick leans against the drugstore, smoking, brushing her hair like a machine. Their grades are sewn into their clothes like references to Hawthorne. The A's stroll along with other A's. The D's honk whenever they pass another D. All the creative writing students recline on the courthouse lawn and play the lute. Wherever they go, they form a big circle. Needless to say, I am the mayor. I live in the white colonial at Maple and Main. I rarely leave the house. The car deflates in the driveway. Vines twirl around the porch swing. Once in a while, a student knocks on the door with a term paper 15 years late, or a question about Yeats, or double spacing. And sometimes one will appear in a window pane to watch me lecturing the wallpaper, quizzing the chandelier, reprimanding the air. Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago, you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye and watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away. A state flower, perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L as far as you can recall. Well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have even forgotten how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. The dead. The dead are always looking down on us, they say, while we are putting on our shoes or making a sandwich. They are looking down through the glass-bottom boats of heaven as they row themselves slowly through eternity. They watch the tops of our heads moving below on earth, and when we lie down in a field or on a couch, drugged perhaps by the hum of a warm afternoon, they think we are looking back at them, which makes them lift their oars and fall silent and wait, like parents, for us to close our eyes. On turning 10. The whole idea of it makes me feel like I'm coming down with something worse than any stomach ache or the headaches I get from reading in bad light. A kind of measles of the spirit, mumps of the psyche, a disfiguring chickenpox of the soul. You tell me it is too early to be looking back, but that is because you have forgotten the perfect simplicity of being one and the beautiful complexity introduced by 2. But I can lie on my bed and remember every digit. At 4, I was an Arabian wizard. I could make myself invisible by drinking a glass of milk a certain way. At 7, I was a soldier. At 9, a prince. But now I am mostly at the window watching the late afternoon light. Back then, it never fell so solemnly against the side of my treehouse, and my bicycle never leaned against the garage as it does today, all the dark blue speed drained out of it. This is the beginning of sadness, I say to myself as I walk through the universe in my sneakers. It is time to say goodbye to my imaginary friends. Time to turn the first big number. It seems only yesterday I used to believe there was nothing under my skin but light. If you cut me, I would shine. But now, when I fall upon the sidewalks of life, I skin my knees, I bleed. And finally, I'm going to close with marginalia. Sometimes the notes are ferocious, skirmishes against the author, raging along the borders of every page in tiny black script. If I could just get my hands on you, Kierkegaard or Connor Cruise O'Brien, they seem to say, I would bolt the door and beat some logic into your head. Other comments are more offhand, dismissive, nonsense, please, ha, that kind of thing. I remember once looking up from my reading, my thumb as a bookmark, trying to imagine what the person must look like who wrote, "Don't be a ninny," alongside a paragraph in the life of Emily Dickinson. Students are more modest, needing to leave only their splayed footprints along the shore of the page. One scrawls metaphor next to a stanza of Eliot's. Another notes the presence of irony 50 times outside the paragraphs of a modest proposal. Or they are fans who cheer from the empty bleachers, hands cupped around their mouths. "Absolutely," they shout to Duns Scotus and James Baldwin. "Yes, bullseye, my man." Check marks, asterisks, and exclamation points rain down along the sidelines. And if you've managed to graduate from college without ever having written man versus nature in a margin, perhaps now is the time to take one step forward. We have all seized the white perimeter as our own and reached for a pen, if only to show we did not just laze in an armchair turning pages. We pressed a thought into the wayside, planted an impression along the verge. Even Irish monks in their cold scriptoria jotted along the borders of the Gospels brief asides about the pains of copying. A bird singing near their window, or the sunlight that illuminated their page. Anonymous men catching a ride into the future on a vessel more lasting than themselves. And you have not read Joshua Reynolds, they say, until you have read him enwreathed with Blake's furious scribbling. Yet the one I think of most often, the one that dangles from me like a locket, was written in the copy of Catcher in the Rye I borrowed from the local library one slow, hot summer. I was just beginning high school then, reading books on a Davenport in my parents' living room, and I cannot tell you how vastly my loneliness was deepened, how poignant and amplified the world before me seemed when I found on one page a few greasy-looking smears, and next to them, written in soft pencil by a beautiful girl I could tell, whom I would never meet, "Pardon the egg salad stains, but I am in love." So that's just a little bit about Billy Collins and some of his earliest poems. Again, possibly one of the most popular poets in America today. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.